Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence to recognize that it has been 1 year since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic and to remember those who lost their lives to COVID-19. J'invite les honorables. Oral questions. Question orale.
A 4-month interval between the first and second doses of the Pfizer vaccine means the government is now advising an off-label use of the vaccine schedule. Could promoting an off-label use of the vaccine have contractual obligations for Canada's deal with Pfizer?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it is not to politicians to make recommendations on usage of vaccines or intervals. It is for experts that Canada turns to, like the National Advisory Council on Immunization, to make the recommendations that will keep the largest numbers of Canadians safe. We have experts and authorities who have analyzed these vaccines, determined them to be safe and effective, and that's how Canadians can have confidence in the vaccine steps going forward. We will always defer to experts and scientists when it comes to Canadians' health.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, there are 4 months between the first vaccine and the second vaccine, and this is really creating a lot of anxiety. Now, clearly, there's no timeline for the vaccine, so can the Prime Minister tell us what the consequence will be of having this 4-month delay in our contracts with Pfizer? Mr. Speaker, the vaccines approved in Canada are safe and effective. The NACI issued directives for the provinces and territories concerning the administration of vaccines that have been authorized for use in Canada. In order to optimize the vaccines across the country and minimize serious consequences of COVID-19, we will always, on this side of the House, trust our experts and scientists when it comes to the health. That is a real action that they can take to support our country.
Member for Carleton.
Yesterday, when I asked about the 850,000 Canadians who've lost their jobs, giving Canada the highest unemployment rate in the G7, the Prime Minister told a childish joke, and he sat down and smirked. He should know that for every 1 percentage point increase in unemployment, we get a 2 percentage point increase in suicides. This is people's lives at stake. They want to know how they're going to pay the bills. We have the worst job record in the G7. Will we get a plan for paychecks, or is the Prime Minister just going to sit there and smirk?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me first correct the record and point out that at 64.3%, Canada has a higher labour force participation rate than Germany at 56.1%, the United States at 61.3%, and Japan at 62%. And let me also say this. I absolutely believe that every Canadian who is unemployed is facing a personal tragedy. And that is why our government has done and will continue to do whatever it takes to support Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
Well, what a shame that the Prime Minister didn't have the guts to stand up and answer the question himself. The reality is that he has said 49 different times that the best measure of job market success is the unemployment rate. And now that we have the highest unemployment rate in the G7, they want to change the measurement. They say we should celebrate them for the recovery of lost jobs. Well, of course, Canada had the most jobs to recover because it had the biggest job losses. People don't want any more games with statistics. They need paychecks in their bank accounts and food on the table. When will they get it?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me share a very important statistic with the member opposite and with all Canadians. In the fourth quarter, Canada's GDP grew at an annualized rate of nearly 10%. That was higher than the US, the UK, Germany, France, and Italy. And I would like to congratulate the Canadians whose hard work, whose innovative approach made that possible. And I'd like to say to all members of this House, particularly the Conservatives, by supporting C-14, we can all support those hardworking Canadians.
Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians if he's expecting a reduced or zero shipment from Moderna on the week of February 22nd?
It was going to be a massive challenge for companies around the world to develop and produce a vaccine that didn't exist yet when we were signing these contracts last summer. That's why we signed so many different contracts for so many potential doses for Canadians.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Period. The Prime Minister said it wasn't for politicians to make decisions on vaccines, but that seems to be exactly what he's doing. The National Immunization Council said not to give the AstraZeneca vaccine to seniors, but his government ignored that advice. Now Pfizer, Canada's chief science officer, and dozens of Canadian medical experts are advising not to delay the Pfizer doses by 4 months. But he's advising it anyway. So my question is the government making political decisions on vaccine dosing because they're trying to cover up their vaccine shortage that they created?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And within that question, it appears that the member perhaps doesn't understand that the federal government does not provide health care directly to Canadians. In fact, what we do is provide support to provinces and territories to deliver on their health care responsibilities. Furthermore, NACI, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, is an independent organization comprised of scientists and researchers who study the evidence, who study the recommendations, and then make recommendations of their own that the provinces and territories can choose to follow.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Well, the minister is the Minister of Health, and these organizations report into her. And I know if I was in her role, I would be asking why there's conflicting advice on all of these dosing decisions and vaccine delivery schedules. I think that that's something that's pretty important for the Canadians to understand. Even the president of Pfizer said that the differences in these opinions could lead to vaccine hesitancy and concerns about taking the vaccines. So why isn't the minister doing her job and putting a structure in place that would actually provide clarity for Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps the member doesn't realize that Health Canada's role is actually to approve a drug or a vaccine in this case based on the review of the science and evidence that the pharmaceutical company presents. And NACI's role is to make recommendations about how best to use vaccines that come onto the market in Canada. That is exactly what they've done. They are the experts and scientists, and this government believes in following the research and science as is determined by those experts.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Interesting, because Pfizer, the company that would put input into the review process, said no dice on the 4-month interval. Nope, we don't think that's good. And in fact, NACI didn't even contact the drug manufacturer for data on the dosing interval. So I kind of think that the minister perhaps isn't doing her job here. There's a lot at stake. Canadians need clarity and certainty on this type of information so that this government isn't causing vaccine hesitancy. Why can't the minister do anything right?
The Honourable Minister.
Well, putting aside the personal attack, Mr. Speaker, what I will say is that it is very important for politicians to follow research, science, and evidence. And that's exactly what's happening in her province, Mr. Speaker, through the Special Advisory Committee and with Dr. Hinshaw. In fact, the province of Alberta has accepted NACI's recommendations, and many others have. This is a decision that is best left with scientists, researchers, and the doctors who will make those dosing decisions.
The Honourable Member for New Westminster, Burnaby.
Canadians have really struggled during this demanding and deadly pandemic year. But Canada's billionaires have added over $60 billion to their wealth so far during the pandemic. We learned this morning from the CCPA that a minimum wealth tax would raise over $10 billion a year to meet Canadians' needs, and 80% of Canadians support this measure. While so many Canadians suffer, why won't the Prime Minister force billionaires to pay their fair share? And why is he so opposed to a wealth tax?
The Honourable Minister.
I would like to thank the member opposite or virtually opposite for the question and for his sincere concern for the Canadians who are hardest hit by this COVID recession. And let me assure the member virtually opposite that our government absolutely does believe, as we said in the fall economic statement, that there are some additional tax measures we need to put in place. We think that now in particular is the time for the international digital giants to pay their fair share. This crisis has shown all of us how dependent we are on the virtual space, and it's time for the international companies to pay their share.
The member says he couldn't make this stuff up. He underestimates himself. You know, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that he brought up our record, because in the first 2 years after we took office, we did what his grandfather would have done. We paid off $40 billion in debt. Crisis that we knew would one day come, and as a result, we had a buffer. We were prepared, and we had the strongest economy in the G7 through the great global recession.